Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Free Press live stream on love, marriage, mothering, topics that are very chill. No one has any strong opinions on these. We're going to begin with love and work our way up to procreation. I'm going to introduce our fabulous guests, really like queens in the Free Press universe. But first, I'm going to take a second, to lay out the dismal truth for our panelists. And that's that young people report being lonelier than ever. According to an APA poll, 30% of 18 to 34-year-olds feel lonely every day or several times a week. Less than half of American households are headed by married couples. That's down from nearly 80% in 1949, mid-century. Birth rates are cratering. We're well below replacement rate. And despite all the therapy, and we're more therapized than ever, we are very sad. To get into all of the above, I'm talking today with two Free Press writers who have been thinking deeply, writing about these topics for many years. To my right, I have Larissa Phillips. She is a writer. She left the city to live on a farm with her family in upstate New York and sort of writes us dispatches about that. She also founded the Volunteer Literacy Project. That's a funny word to stumble over. Which teaches adults how to read. Larissa has written for us on marriage, why she decided to hang an American flag at her home, being a wife, killing chickens. She's an incredible writer, and I know there is an upcoming story about matchmaking, which I'm very excited to read. And then we have Miss Abigail Shrier. She's a journalist. She's an author of two incredible books, Bad Therapy and Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters, which I'm sure is one of the more banned books of the past decade. If not the most banned. She is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. She's a lawyer. She's making us all look bad. She also has a brand new piece out today about what she learned about motherhood and about herself really when her 6-year-old needed ear surgery. She's also written for us. She's also written about rom-coms for us, very alarming kindergarten curriculum, parenting, and gender ideology. Both of them are here to talk about what we've lost when it comes to all things love and culture and how we might be able to get it back. So Abigail and Larissa, after that big windup, thank you for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having us on.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Larissa, I'd love to start with you because reading through your pieces that you've written for us in the lead up to prepare for this, I see one of the themes throughout your writing is what happens when progressive ideals, the ones you grew up with as the daughter of two sort of hippie activist types, what happens when those ideals crash into reality? And you wrote about this thing in your essay about becoming a wife. So I'd love for you to tell me about the realization that actually everything wasn't going to be divided equally in your home. And, you know, despite the idealism of your parents and maybe even you, there were going to be gender roles. Talk to me about that.
I grew up in kind of the heyday of the feminist movement, I think, in the 70s, and I was a teenager in the 80s. And we had some really big, beautiful ideas about how women were going to finally be able to realize themselves, and there was no limit. And I heard all the time, like, you can do anything, and you don't need to be married, you don't need to have kids, you really can do anything. And to my mom, who was not a radical feminist, but and loved being a mother, to her, this felt like she was kind of correcting something that she had sort of had to deal with, just this intense pressure to be a mother and to be a wife very early on. So it really felt to her like she was, opening up doors for me. And I think that was really common. And but then the problem was that I did want to have kids, and I like, I wanted to have a boyfriend, and then I fell in love with my boyfriend, and I wanted to be with him forever. So, that piece was funny to write because I was literally like, whoa, wife. Like it was like kind of hard to even talk. Like I felt really funny talking like, okay, like just saying the W word was hard for me but that was what the piece was really about, was coming to terms with that, because especially living on a farm, like that really kind of changed everything, because I was like, oh, there's actually some merit to gender roles. Like my husband was doing a lot of really hard things that I didn't want to do, and I was doing stuff that I actually liked doing. So I was like, oh, well, let's just do what we both really like to do in our particular personal lives, and do what they want to do. But, that's kind of the beautiful thing right now. We can like pick our roles that we want to play, that we're best at. And they do sometimes align with stereotypical gender roles.
It's great because while you write a lot about like the harsh realities of farm life, and they are harsh, and of kind of realizing, maybe it makes more sense to stay at home than, go out and be an editor, even though it's really tough and you kind of are scraping together the money. We have Abigail, who is here to let us in on the fantasy world. Abigail, you argued recently about, in a brilliant essay about When Harry Met Sally, that rom-coms taught your generation, Generation X, I believe, about relationships when sex ed did not. What were the lessons that rom-coms were aiming to teach?
I think the key lesson of the rom-com is that surprise is the best part of life. You don't know yourself all that well, and the person you're meant to be with might be someone you never expected, and that journey is something that it allows you to learn about yourself and to create something great with someone else. And what we've done with the rising generation, we've made their lives so hard, is because we've asked them over and over to define themselves. And we've done this in younger and younger ages. What's your sexual orientation? What's your gender identity? What are your hobbies? What are your activities? Make sure you write these down. And we've taught them that these are fixed and immutable, and that they should go into the world looking for a mate, playing matchy-matchy with this ridiculous list. And the problem is that life and love are really about discovery, and they don't know that. So they show up in the world, and we've given them the tools to pre-screen based on a ridiculous list of preconceived ideas about themselves and what they might want. And they pre-screen all sorts of potential mates who might be right for them, but they'll never know. And instead they're playing matchy-matchy, like I'm looking for someone who loves pickleball as much as I do. And they have no idea that misses the point of finding the right person for you and thinking about what you might do and create together.
There's a great line, Abigail. You wrote, Sally would have never matched with Harry on Hinge. Height alone would have pre-weeded him. He is of slim build and average looks. What is your advice to a Sally who wants a Harry, or a Harry who wants a Sally then?
That's right. I mean, remember that Billy Crystal's 5'5". Alex P. Keaton was 5'4". I mean, these were our leading men. Ralph Macchio is not a particularly big guy. He's not gorgeous. These were average guys in a lot of ways, but they were, scrappy and surprising. And they were absolutely, they showed a lot of grit, and they had showed a lot of drive, and it was really attractive.
I love that.
And my advice to women is, don't be so closed off to what you think you want, because really you're not allowing, the potential, the wonderful variety of humanity to surprise you.
Larissa has another solution. Maybe they can work in tandem. And it's that we need to bring back busybody matchmaking and old dowagers who strike up conversations on airplanes. Larissa, why do you think kind of old-timey meddling, aunts and yentas could be a solution here?
Well, I think it used to be really a part of culture. I mean, and society. I really think it's actually almost like a built-in urge. And because I feel it now, because I'm in my 50s, and the urge for a baby, like, is still there, but I'm not going to have a baby. I want other people to have babies. I want babies. And it really does feel like this very kind of almost like biological urge, which makes sense. That
like a biological urge to matchmake.
To have other people have babies. I want other people to have babies. I like it gives me like so much happiness to see young people getting married, young people having babies. And I've actually thought about this in terms of rom-coms also, because there's something, it's that ending scene where the two people are finally falling in love and they're hugging and kissing, and you're like, it really is, it's like a civilizational satisfaction. You're like, civilization will continue because these people have come together. It just feels like a very biological urge, in the same way that wanting to have a baby when you're 20s felt to me.
I mean, I agree with Larissa that matchmaking can be wonderful here, because the problem with the matchmaking going on is because you're selecting from yourself based on an idea that your desires are totally fixed and totally irrespective of who you might meet or who you might become together. And a matchmaker very often will look past all that and say, okay, what are your values? What's really important here? And it won't be, he must be 6 feet tall.
Right.
Yeah. I think they'll also, like the professional matchmakers will really counsel the people, their clients, that you only get a few things. You don't get that's great. You have a really, really long list of what you want. Pick three. You're going to get three of those things. Like, tell me
Right.
what the most important things are, because you're just not going to get everything. And that is part of being in a relationship, a long-term relationship, is just that sort of ongoing rediscovery of each other, and discovering things that maybe you didn't really appreciate originally, kind of come up later, are a little more enjoyable or useful later on in life. Yeah, you can't, just that sort of rigid understanding of like what I'm getting and I want this whole package. It just doesn't, it's not helpful.
And it's funny. It's like, I keep thinking about this, that like, it's now like the conservative argument to like throw freedom to the wind and be free and like sneak out and get drunk a little bit and have a cigarette. Like, you need to live. And it's like, this is historically like the left-wing worldview that you should do this. And I think that there's been like a realignment in the past few years about now conservatives are more concerned with things like, sexual pleasure and carnal urges and these like primal things.
You're right. The left has been unbearably dark. It's all
Yeah.
about scaring kids about endless risk. And that's what we have. We have a generation that's terrified of the unknown. And the problem with that is the best things in life are unknown. You don't know how your marriage will turn out, whether someone's going to be right for you. You have to take a chance and go on the date and be open-minded. And if you're not willing to take a risk, you're really not going to get, what you're ultimately going to find most satisfying and most, pleasurable. And that's the problem. We've really scared a generation way past where we should have.
I don't understand how the left, as I'm tribally and ethnically like on the left, like all my family and friends are on the left. I grew up on the left, and most of it seems like the birth rate is especially low on that side of the spectrum. And I'm always like, when is that going to become like a sort of a political responsibility to sort of keep producing for the left, because they're kind of going to end up being like the Shakers. Like a generation from now, there are going to be even fewer people on the left, whereas the right is just expanding like crazy. People are having like trad families.
Well, the right is optimistic. Yeah. And until you look at life with a sense of possibility, whether it comes from your church or and your faith or some other source, a sense of pride and possibility, you have no shot of having children. Because people who feel miserable about the world, they don't have kids. And they, by the way, don't fall in love usually either. It's the most attractive thing in other people really is joy. It really is. And you see people who are glum, who are negative, who are dark about the world, who think climate change means a catastrophe. Trump is a fascist dictator. We're all going to hell. That is not a way to meet someone, among other things. And it's certainly not something that will prompt you to want to bring children into the world.
Yeah. Well, I want to get to bringing children into the world and what that does to you as a person and to your politics. But I want to pull on a thread, Abigail, that you brought up, which is like this obsession with control and almost like a stringency about how you think your life is going to go. And we had an amazing piece come out this morning, a reported piece from Cara Kennedy about the rise of the prenup. I didn't know this, but in the 1990s, around 8% of married couples had one, and it was very hush-hush. Now 40% of married millennials do. So a lot of reasons for that. People are bringing more money to marriages later. They're inheriting more money from their boomer parents. Something like $80 trillion are going to be passed down from the boomers to the younger generation in the next 10 years. Quick reactions before we move on. Larissa Phillips, pro or anti-prenup?
I mean, it just sounds horrible on an emotional level. It's assuming that you're going to get divorced. But yeah, I guess I don't know what it's like to be, coming into a marriage with a whole lot of money.
Right. It's a terrible development. I mean, let me just say, if you come into a marriage with so much money that you are at risk of attracting people just so they can take your money, that's a different story. You're talking about vast wealth. But the vast majority of people are not. And instead, what they're doing is they're showing up to marriage, treating it as a business deal. And what they're saying with the prenup is, I'm in this for as long as it's good for me, and I'm reaching my goals, and I assume you're the same. And that's a terrible way to go into a marriage.
So I'd like to take a step back and talk about how we got to a place where so many people feel they need prenups, feel they need a therapist, feel they need medication to go through their lives, et cetera, et cetera. We live in a strange reality that Abigail sort of illuminated in her book really starkly, where Holocaust survivors see themselves as more resilient than 16-year-olds who have lost their cats. The irony, of course, is that by every measure, we live in a very luxurious moment. Life expectancy has increased, child mortality has plummeted. We rarely encounter in real life, we'll leave aside the online world for now, horrible violence, or at least at a much lower rate than used to be true. How come kids, Abigail, kids that never saw the beaches of Normandy or the jungles of Vietnam, are so depressed?
Well, they're so alone. We've given them an atomized existence, apart from community, apart from extended family, apart from neighborhood friends that they made on their own. Everything's been pre-selected by mom. And unfortunately, the parents have also scared them. We've filled their heads with every possible risk. Parents are the most anxious. This is the most anxious generation of parents raising the most anxious generation of children. Now, there is understandable reasons for a lot of anxiety. There no question is, dealing with, we were watching this technology evolve so quickly, so beyond our understanding and control. And it's very natural to say, I don't even know what she's looking at or who's walking in the door virtually to her life or his life. That's a scary thing. And so I understand it. The problem is we've terrified children about the world around them. And they need that world and they need those connections. And the last thing we haven't given them parental authority. We haven't given them moms and dads who say, I'm in charge. I don't care what anyone else says. That I'm telling you what's right. And in the absence of that, where everyone's on one level with their parents, the world is a scarier place because no one's ultimately protecting them.
Right. It's like the parents are neglecting their children in certain ways and that they don't want to they don't want to cross a boundary. They want to, let them get whatever grade or whatever it is. But on the other hand, they're not enforcing basic things to, raise a person of good character. It's like all of the negatives of sort of negligent parenting and none of the positives.
That's exactly right. When you give your kids structure, when you tell them the rules, you can also let them go out into the world more easily and develop judgment and exercise that judgment on their own. But when you are micromanaging them, tracking their position on your app instead of trusting them or giving them the tools so they can trust themselves, they aren't as trustworthy, frankly. They don't know how to exercise judgment because they've been micromanaged to death. But also, they're in a scarier world where they can't trust, hey, if I meet a stranger, it's going to be okay. I'll figure it out, just like generations before me did.
Right. And I think obviously this follows them into adulthood. And Larissa, I want to read a sentence from a essay you wrote about the chaotic glory of growing up, which I loved. You wrote, the fumbling intensity of these years can be painful and embarrassing to remember. I think that's one reason so many adults can't stop disparaging them. How could I have been so clueless? And was I that much of a dork? But that cluelessness and confusion is the required toll for passage to the next stage. And I'd love if you could say a little more about that. What experiences are you talking about here that you worry children, maybe your kids' age or younger, aren't getting?
Well, that specific passage, I was thinking about how everyone does have painful memories of what a dork they were when at that age, and like, if only I could go back and do it better. And so we've passed on in part, that's part of it. I think we passed on this just horror at those years, but with pain, you grow. And obviously I'm not talking about real, pain. I've had a few people say like, oh, what about like really horrible things? Horrible abuse is terrible to children too. It's not just puberty that whatever, like that's a totally separate issue. And just the growing pains of passing through puberty, you're going to have to go through hard things. And it's passage. It's required that you're going to suffer a little bit. And then,
Right.
And then you grow. In a lot of cultures, they've ritualized it so that it really is specifically a very painful thing. And I think that's almost, I don't want people to go through like really hard pain, but I do think those specific rituals would be great if we had some more rituals, because just that meaningful passage, to really highlight it would be helpful for a lot of kids, I think.
That's totally right. And also we divorced kids from their grandparents, right? From the influence of the prior generation and the stories of them, because grandparents will tell you, listen, I went through worse. And no one likes to hear that, but actually it often is very comforting when you think, oh, wow, at my age, my grandfather was storming Normandy. And you start to realize, I think I can go to the market by myself. My grandmother was getting married when she was only a couple years older and starting a family. Maybe I can chill out about whether someone looked at me weird on the street. American young people in college are reporting fear at these completely humdrum things, like seeing a stranger on the street who looks at them funny, because they have no way of calibrating it against real risk and dangers that people in their own family overcame.
Right. Right. And they don't really know what's normal. And I think when we live in a world, and Abigail, you've written about this, better and more than anyone else, where puberty is becoming optional, where I don't know one 13-year-old girl who, when presented with a button that would say, skip this part, wouldn't hit it a million times. It is, as Larissa, you write about, humiliating to go through puberty. It is so bad, but it also it's like a chrysalis and you come out like a woman.
Yeah. Also, I mean, in my day, it was exciting too, because I mean, in part, I was the youngest of three. I was so excited, even though there were painful and horrible things that happened, but I was so excited to finally be able to have that independence and to have a life and to have interesting things to do. And I don't know why that's not still part of it. Like even just for example, like when my son was little and we would go to the lake and you could see the teenagers out on the dock. And I would swim my son out there. He wanted to go out there, so I swam him out there. Well, when I was a kid, nobody swam me out to the dock. You had to wait until you were a teenager, So I think that's part of it. Like I wish that I hadn't done that. I should have been like, it's when you're a teenager you get to do that. You know what I mean? Like so many things have just been given earlier because we don't want to see our kids suffer, and so there aren't these just sort of glorious, exciting things that you finally get to do when you're a teenager.
But also, Larissa, you bring up a great point, which is multi-generation, right? Like kids of different ages all together. Oh, yeah. So when you're the youngest, because I see this with my daughter, when you're the youngest and you see what the older kids can do, you can't wait to do it. But we're raising kids today as only children or as totally separate, each one siloed in their own set of activities. They're not bumping up against the older kids who are doing the next step, because when they can't wait. When they see their cousins going through things, various rites of passage, they can't wait till it's their turn.
Yeah. And that they weren't allowed to do. Like it was, right. That sort of parental authority again, that was like, no, you can't you can't stay out late. Your curfew is different. And just all these things that were held back from you until you finally got to be old enough to do them. And then it was exciting.
Exactly.
Abigail, your daughter actually might be an exception. I fear that by high school, she'll be like invading Venezuela. I don't know if that has to do with having older brothers or, but Abigail, I'm conscious of your time and that you're going to have to drop soon. So I'm going to quickly go to your story, and whoever is listening, please drop your questions in the chat and our producer will grab them for me and we'll get to them at the end. But Abigail, in a story that just came out in the Free Press today, you wrote about your son becoming sick and really the primal nature of motherhood. I'm going to read a little bit back to you. You wrote, people who talk about the decision to have kids get so many things wrong, which probably explains why we've done such a disastrous job selling parenthood to others. We make raising kids seem tedious and trivial, thankless work for meager benefit, life messiest and most tiresome burden. Essentially, you're like an unpaid manager. So what do people get wrong there? What do people get? Is that not true? Is it not life's most tiresome burden?
No, it's the whole point of life. And it's why we're here. I mean, let me just say, it's so funny, what we do to young women is we tell them, you want to be powerful and self-actualized, go join the C-suite. Well, it's a ridiculous thing to say, because in most institutions, most organizations, the least powerful place to be is where you have to constantly harmonize your views with others, constantly bite your tongue about things, that you wish were different. You have to put your personal views aside. In a family, you get to run it however you and your spouse see fit. That's up to you. You want real power? Start a family and run it with your values. That's powerful. There you've got a whole world you've created, and you've got a whole legacy too.
There's another line you have that's like sort of amazing, but it's almost harsh. There's like a harsh, tough love here. You write, no one is afraid to bring kids into the world because of election results or climate change. That knocks the wind vane backward. You don't decide against procreation because you're mothering Mother Earth. You obsess over the planet because you don't have children. And I'm curious if you think we've seen like a cleaving of young people to more and more progressive causes because they haven't had kids yet.
I think that's right. I think that parenthood and really moderates you in a lot of ways. You start realizing like, yes, I'm worried about these things. Maybe you're worried about the climate, whatever else, but I'm not going to take it to an extreme. I'm not going to set up, I'm also I have to be hopeful because I have to pass on hope to my children. So I have to say, we don't know what inventions may come. And if you're interested in climate science, then you should go into it and help us come up with a solution. I mean, that's what motherhood requires. And when you don't have that, you can just sit with your worry for a very long time.
I hope everyone goes to read Abigail's essay.
Thank you.
It's so beautiful. My editor just said, I'm just a guy sobbing in a WeWork at this point, like after reading it. And it was just awesome. So I encourage everyone to read it. I'll let you drop off,
okay,
Abigail, and I'll talk to you.
Thanks so much.
Bye, Abigail.
Bye.
Soon. Larissa, you wrote in an essay for us that your mom told you that she wanted you to do more interesting things with your life than immediately becoming a mother. She sounds like a really interesting and not straightforward character. What did she mean by that?
She was very, I don't want to make her sound like she was hardlining, get out there in the work world, but she just really wanted me to feel like I could do whatever I wanted to do. And in her view, that meant going in, sort of maybe not having babies right away, not looking for a husband, just kind of being free to do whatever I wanted to do. So, and it was just so different than how she'd been raised, so she was really reacting. I mean, we're so often reacting to how we were raised, and she really resented just that haranguing constantly. Like, you have to get married. You have to get married. When are you getting married? When are you gonna have kids?
Totally.
When are you gonna have another kid? I mean, it was like oppressive to her. I mean, it's a conundrum, because on the one hand, we need children. On the other hand, and we want, as a society, we need children, and maybe as individuals, we want to have children, but we also want to do other things too, So it's a real conundrum, the individual or society.
And I think the promise of, third wave feminism was maybe that there's no rules. You can act like a man. You can hook up, be promiscuous, not get married as late as you want. It's all on the table. But of course, that just means there are still rules. You just have to now figure them out for yourself and enforce them yourself.
Yeah, it's a lot more rules, actually. And going back to what Abigail said, you having children does moderate you. So in so many ways, I know so many people who, we all started with our kids. We were going to not raise them gender free, but we were going to really break down, gender stereotypes and everything. And then we have little boys who are, dumping the doll out of the stroller so that they can zoom it around the living room really fast, and, or the little girls who use the trucks to make doll beds. Like and there are outliers and there's overlap, of course, but in general, the kids really, they are who they are. And many of them, a majority of them, follow stereotypes.
Right. It's interesting. We have a comment from a reader called Brooke who says, we don't just pre-screen partners, we pre-screen jobs, friends, hobbies, cultural tastes, which is true, but you cannot interview your kid before you meet them.
Yeah. And that is why it's such an incredible experience, because you are just like, you're meeting them and you're figuring out who they are, and they are who they are. And it is also, I think, one of the great things about having more than one kid, which, I mean, there's just I get why people have one kid, but it's just so great to have more than one kid. And my greatest regret in life, I just always want to put it out there, is that I didn't have more kids. I stopped at 2, and I really wish I'd had a third. Like, it's almost like a hole in my sort of psyche that I really like. There was a third kid I was supposed to have, and I didn't. But it really does. You just learn so much, because you realize with the second kid that you really have no influence over who they are. They are who they are, and they are very different. And they're who they are from the very beginning. And
they're different. Their kids are so different from each other. We talk a lot about parenting gentle parenting, disciplinarian parenting, the 1, 2, 3 method, timeouts. We've done a lot of stories about this, but I always wonder, well, what if a parenting method works really well on one kid, but not on the next?
Totally. And that happens all the time. I mean, I had one kid who was very compliant, very easygoing, responded so well to everything. And then another kid who was so difficult, just rebellious, like just no, over everything. So, and depending on which kid you have first, it can really wreak havoc or, it requires a lot of just kind of going with the flow and figuring stuff out as you go along.
Yes, it's really, really true. I want to transition a little bit to the essay that's coming out tomorrow. And you talked about being 26. It's the 90s. You're in New York. Hookup culture is like kind of just getting its water legs. What happens next? How did you meet your now husband?
I was 26, which seemed really late then. That probably doesn't seem late now, but when I was 26, it seemed like I should have already found my life person by now. I know, and I just felt like I was never gonna find anybody. I felt like I was kind of weird, and then I was moving to New York City, and my friend was like, "Oh, I have this guy who I think you might like," and I liked him. She kind of did like a little setup at a party, and I didn't put this in the article, but he was telling these stories when I first saw him, and he used the word mawkish. He was like reading from actually like fake personal ads that he and his friend had written that were like really obnoxious and stupid. And he used the word mawkish. And I was like, oh, mawkish, because that's my game, like flirting game. So I said, mawkish. And he was just like immediately turned his attention to me. And so our first conversation was about the really love words, and 30 years later we talk about words all the time and kind of share words, and we just fell in love very, very quickly. We were a good match, not perfect, but a great match.
I love that. And 2 kids later. Joseph Massey writes very vulnerably, "I'm too introverted for dating apps and too canceled. I've resorted to voluntary celibacy. I wonder if the solutions you offer in this matchmaking essay and these sort of rituals, talk to us a little bit about the rituals that might have, that could maybe help someone like Joseph who feels like I can't put my public persona out there because of politics and I hate dating apps."
Joseph Massey is like a really incredible poet, and somebody out there has got to have somebody for him. I mean, his poems are so beautiful. I'm such a fan of his poetry. So somebody out there has got to have somebody for him. I mean, I just think that's the solution. But dating apps seem horrible. I wouldn't have been able to do dating apps either. And that's where we've lost. We've stopped. We need to help each other out. We need to set each other up.
And you write about cotillion, debutante parties, community dances, 6th grade square dancing, where it was like embarrassing and there was straw around and your parents sort of like poked you from behind to get in there. But those things serve an important purpose, I think.
I really think that all of those rituals, which my generation really hated, we were by the time I was in junior high and high school, we were like, oh, prom's so lame, and we don't want to, we're going to go with friends instead. And I mean, there's some like really beautiful things, like there were gay couples started going to prom when I was in high school, and it was like, wow. I mean, I think it was like even newsworthy, like, and that's great. And sure, friends should go. I mean, you shouldn't, on the one hand, I'm like, yeah, you shouldn't not be able to go to prom because you couldn't get a date. On the other hand, it really was that sort of like socially enforced hurdle that you had to get over. And if you don't ask somebody out on a date, if you don't learn how to ask someone out, when are you going to learn it? And when is that going to become just like a normal thing? And because now, I mean, my kids have told me that, like my son has been like a little bit like worried about, did that seem like I was flirting? Like it's the dating culture is so constricted right now. It's so uptight, and it's not good.
Yeah. Are you Gen X?
Yeah. I'm like Gen X.
Gen X is all. I love Gen X. Yeah. You are like the last cool generation.
Yeah.
There is just such a good, you guys have all the right ideas. I'm going to wrap us shortly, but I want to read something that you wrote back to you that I thought was just really beautiful. You wrote, I stand by a lot of the feminist lessons I learned as a child. Of course, women can sit on the Supreme Court and be astronauts or physicists or lawyers. Of course, we can survive without men. But getting married, being a wife, being a mother, it is not a step back in time or surrendering of ground. It's actually the best part of my life. And I'm curious, Larissa, now that sort of maybe the pendulum's swinging back. I mean, there's a big debate about have we reached peak woke? Have we not reached peak woke? I'm curious how you think we get back to sort of the healthy sexuality, the healthy dating culture, the healthy feminism that was a miracle for you and for I, but that seems to have kind of tumbled over into something excessive. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I did want to just say real quick first that I feel like one of the things that's not sort of highlighted about marriage that often that is so important is like we just didn't break up, my husband and me. We didn't get divorced. Like the way you don't get divorced is you don't get divorced.
You don't get divorced.
You know, that's the thing that you do. And you grow apart and then you come back together. We grew apart so many times. We had some really, really rough times because there's no other way. And we just didn't give up. And actually one of the things I used to think about was in Harry Met Sally, the old people talking, and how old couples never say, oh yeah, it was easy all the way through. They always say, well, we almost didn't make it, but we hung in there and then it got better. And it really is like, now having like in our like third decade together there's just no comparing it. It's so incredible to have like shared a life with somebody and to have built your values and you have your children in common and you know, we have one child who's very difficult still. And just to have that shared experience, like if I had a second husband, there's no way we would be able to help my kid in the way that we are still able to stay focused on him. So I just like really, just don't.
And you've written about how like everyone in your world was divorced.
Everybody. I mean, and although interestingly, my siblings and I, and all of my generation, none of us are divorced. We all stayed together. All my cousins and my siblings were, because we were all like, that wasn't that great. It really was not worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. That sucked.
Yeah. So, but so the solution, I don't know. I don't know.
Moving upstate to a farm.
I wish everybody could move to a farm, but that's not going to happen. I do think like faith actually might be, as someone who grew up as an atheist, I think faith is like actually really important. It turns out, I think the atheist experiment has not worked out that well. And I think that just more traditional parenting, like, yeah, I'm like a lapsed leftist who's come back to like much more traditional things. And I think that with parenting, especially, and education, that we on the left need to sort of like re-examine and maybe take some things from the traditional world.
Right. It's like we're sort of dealing with like if 2012 was like the peak of like idealism and like peak Obama and we all have the internet now and we're going to catch Coney and whatever else was going on in our heads. Now to this point is just like watching the come down and realizing like none of it happened that way.
Yeah, it didn't work out.
But there's
not as far as it was going to go. And now it's time to like reassess. You know, we got a lot of like really incredible gains that none of us like would want to get rid of. I mean, I think the vast majority is happy with so many gains that we've made, but it's like, okay, it's just now it's time to reassess.
Right. And I think, and then I promise I'll let you go. There's like an element, we did a great story a few months ago by this writer called Rachel Genfaza about how out of reach the American dream is for Gen Z. They just cannot afford to buy a house. And, you know, they're really in debt. And I'm curious how much you think how much of this that we've been discussing, me, you, and Abigail, is economic.
I mean, it's always been hard. People have always been broke. I don't know. I feel like I don't know. I shouldn't talk about this, but I feel like if I were young, I would move to wherever I had to move to if I wanted a house. I would, which is what I did too. I wanted to live in Manhattan. I couldn't afford Manhattan. Then I wanted to live in Park Slope. I couldn't afford Park Slope. So I went to like the very border of Park Slope and we bought a really, really crappy house that everybody was horrified by. And then we moved upstate to a county that nobody had heard of. And that's very poor. And we invested value over the last like 15 years and it slowly changed. And and we changed. And I mean, I don't know. I've always bought really, really terrible, crappy houses and put value in
There
it.
you go.
And
Yeah, no,
there's
I
that.
think too about my grandparents, who it's not like they had college funds saved when they had my dad. They didn't have anything. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I think there's this idea that you need to be, and I forget, someone writes a lot about this in the Atlantic, that marriage is the finish line. It's the trophy as opposed to the starting line and the thing you do with someone else to get to
Yeah.
solvency. I have this inkling that, Larissa, you're about to become like a very successful matchmaker. I think a lot of people are going to reach out to you, whether you like it or not, after this essay tomorrow. I have one couple under my belt.
Good job.
It's like my proudest accomplishment. So I hope everyone who's listening, go think of 2 single friends to set up. I think that's the best thing we could get out of this conversation.
Totally. Yeah. We might have to bring back the dinner party.
Larissa, dinner. It's going to be a huge fall and winter for dinner parties, people. Huge. Larissa, you are such a fan favorite at the Free Press. We love you so much. We love your essays. They're like cold buckets of water on your head in the best way. And I can't thank you enough for writing them and for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Suzy. I'm so happy to be here.
All right. Talk soon.
All right.
Bye. Everyone.